So probably the biggest thing that they can do is paying more attention to their self-talk. It's interesting because sometimes I'll ask people, well, what were you thinking? And they say, well, I wasn't thinking anything. And I say to them, that's impossible. You probably were thinking something. You just weren't aware of it. So let's increase awareness to what your self-talk is. And what I find is that when people start paying attention to their self-talk, more often than not, it's negative. And so what I teach them is not only to make the negative self-talk positive, but it's also oftentimes irrational. So I change that from irrational to rational. So it's negative and irrational to positive and rational thoughts. And I do really encourage people to write them down, especially in the beginning when you're trying to get used to this process and changing your thoughts. Because if you're just thinking about it in your head, sometimes it doesn't resonate as much. So I say, hey, write it down, cross out the old thought, write down the new thought, and then just keep repeating that new set of thoughts. And eventually you'll internalize that. And then that will become your internal dialogue automatically without even having to think about it.
Hello and welcome to the High Performance Podcast. My guest is Dr. Kimberly Wagner. She's a sports psychologist and performance coach. In her extensive research, she's studied the top traits and skills of Major League Baseball players. Dr. Wagner has combined her research in performance psychology with her experience working with clients in her clinical practice to create her flagship course, Believe It, Achieve It, that helps people reach their highest level of success. So please, welcome Dr. Kimberly Wagner. Dr. Wagner, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so excited to talk to you today. We have a lot in common, similar businesses, and we're talking before the show about baseball. I love baseball, and you did your dissertation on baseball as well. But before we dive into that, let's, for the viewers and listeners out there, what is sports psychology and why is it important?
So sports psychology is taking sports, but instead of focusing on the physical aspect of the athlete's performance, it focuses on the mental aspect. So the mental aspect can help enhance the physical performance. And it's really important, especially the higher levels that you go up in competition. When you're younger, physical skill can get you really far, but at the higher levels, it's not going to get you as far unless you also incorporate those mental skills into your performance.
Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense. The beginning levels, like I played Little League baseball, and it was all about like which kids had like the most strength, right? Like we had a pitcher who was like had a mustache in fifth grade, and he was throwing at 70 miles an hour. Right? So that's helpful. But yeah, as you get higher to more elite levels, be it in sports or in business, like it's that mental edge, because as you climb up in the ranks, you have more and more equal talent. And like all these people are coming with this equal talent levels, maybe even equal work ethic, but it's that mental edge that's really, I think, still even unexplored. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Definitely underutilized.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, sports psychology has been around for a while. Mental performance and business has been around for a while. But it's surprising that it seems like it's still this unexplored region. A lot of people are unfamiliar with it. And I'm wondering, do you get a lot of satisfaction? I'm guessing you do, out of when people like have that light bulb moment and they go, oh my goodness, like you just helped me break through. Is that satisfying for you?
Absolutely. That's why I do what I do.
Nice, nice. Well, yeah, let's talk about like how you got into this, how you got into sports psychology, and now you're working with businesses and coaching them on the mental aspects. What drew you to sports psychology? Your background, how did you get into it?
So I was an athlete my whole life, competitive athlete, and I did not play past college. But when I was in my doctorate program, getting my doctorate degree in psychology, you had to pick a research topic. And so I had attended a presentation from a mentor of mine. And at the time, he was the team sports psychologist for the San Diego Chargers. And even I had never heard of the field of sports psychology, even though I had been involved in sports my whole life. And so he was talking about what he taught the San Diego Chargers and how he incorporated it into their performance. And I thought, gosh, that's so interesting. So I then chose that as my research topic in order to complete my dissertation. Mm-hmm. But what I did is I did it with Major League Baseball players instead of NFL football players. So what I looked at was the mental skills and characteristics that enhance performance in Major League Baseball players. So I got all the research, all the background on that. And then I had some wonderful opportunities to incorporate what I learned in my research with in my private practice with college students, with junior professional athletes, and then with professional athletes as well. And interestingly, I started getting phone calls from business professionals in all fields, medicine, law, obviously like CEOs and entrepreneurs. And they were asking me, hey, can you teach me what you teach your high-level athletes? Because it really is the same thing. They have a high pressure to perform. They have to perform consistently. And if they don't, they're at risk of either losing their job or not being successful. So I started doing that as well. And that's kind of how I got into the business and executive coaching.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's a great story. Can you tell us what you discovered working with some of these Major League Baseball players, certain things or key aspects that either like their personality or skill set that really made them great mentally, and then other things like maybe things you discovered that like weaknesses that they could learn and improve their mental edge?
Yeah, so in terms of mental skills, particularly when dealing with baseball players, the number one thing that the participants in my study talked about was the ability to be resilient and to deal with failure, because everyone knows baseball is a game of failure. And so that probably, particularly in baseball, was the most important skill. Other things such as focus and concentration, because baseball is a slow game. And so you have to learn how to go in and out of focus effectively, because you can't be hyper-focused the whole game. Learning how to manage the stress that goes along, not just with playing in games, but with being the athlete and traveling. And they call it kind of like the 182 game grind. Using positive self-talk, how to deal with the pressure, right? You're on a global scale and people are constantly criticizing you. So how do you manage that pressure effectively and not let it have a negative effect on your performance? Things like expectations, right? You get traded to a team or you get picked number one in the draft. People are going to expect that you're going to be the best player in the league, and how to effectively manage those expectations is really important.
Wow. Yeah. Just hearing this, like I'm getting a little nervous. just thinking about, because I love baseball and I played Little League and, dreamt about playing in the major leagues, and just thinking about, and watching, sometimes you'll see an up and coming player who comes out of the minors and doesn't quite make it, but you could, and it's kind of sad because like if they had a mental coach, they could probably make it. Like you could see the raw talent there. So I was getting nervous just you telling me that, like imagining the expectations, the resiliency. Again, like you said, like baseball is a game of failure, right? So it's like, okay, no one's hitting over 500. That doesn't really happen.
Nope.
So it's like you're striking out most of the time is what's happening. So out of what you said there, of all those, characteristics and skills, what was interesting to me, and I never really thought about this, was shifting gears or shifting focus. So like you said, baseball is not always intense. You're sitting in the dugout, like getting up to bat. So that if someone's motor is running the whole time, like I'm amped up for the whole game, I'm going to get mentally fatigued, right? Maybe even physically fatigued. And I need to learn how to find a way to slow down my physiology, chill out. And then when I'm up, on deck, ready to bat, like I got to get amped up again. And that seems like, that could apply in a lot of different sports. Do you have like a technique that you could share that's helpful for people to do that, to kind of shift gears during competition?
Yeah, so there's probably two situations, particularly again in baseball, that are most critical. And it's when you're going up to bat. And then the other one would be players that play in the outfield, because it can get kind of boring out there sometimes. So for people that are ready to go up to bat, I usually have them do like a pre-at-bat routine, and that incorporates a lot of things. It incorporates some breathing exercises to get them relaxed, but not too relaxed. It also incorporates things like positive self-talk, so helping them to build up their confidence. Also just, the practice swings that they kind of take over to the side to kind of activate that muscle memory for their swing, so they don't have to think about the technicalities of their swing. They can just do it and not overthink it. So those are just kind of some examples when a baseball player is about to go at bat. For players that are in the outfield, I try to use something physical as well as using self-talk. So an example would be having them kind of like hit their hand in their glove or something like that, which is a sign to their physical body, hey, let's get ready because the ball could come to me and I got to be ready. And then also just, again, incorporating that self-talk of, some kind of mantra they might have, or just even, something that resonates with them and is personal to them, that gets that in that focus and in that mindset that they need to make that play quickly if they need to.
I love that. So it's physical, like a physical routine, and self-talk both, like a mantra. Because if the more you repeat that routine, right, the more just like your body will just automatically shift into that zone of performance.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I love the idea of a mantra because people they think about self-talk. It's not necessarily some complex sentence in your head or some sort of fluffy affirmation. I can do it. I'm the best baseball player. It's like, no, it could be like a personal mantra for that player that really is like a trigger keyword that gets them into like a readiness state or a confidence state, right? It's just more of like a simple sort of command. Is that right?
Yeah, the simpler the better, and the more personal the better. So I'll sometimes help them come up with examples, but then I also say, well, what do you think is going to be the most effective for you? Because these are my examples, but you need to come up with things that are going to work personally for you.
Yeah. That's I think key is, you can read a lot of books on sports psychology and mental performance, but it really does take a coach to say something like you just did. Like, it needs to be personal for you, and I can help you maybe find that one, because sometimes a self-talk could be even like a masquerading as a self-critic, right? And unless you have like a coach to say, what's going to bring you into the most resourceful, powerful, attentive state. And conversely, do you have techniques for an athlete to get out of that high revving zone and then chill back down? Is there certain techniques for that?
Yeah, so mostly at that point, they're trying to calm themselves down on a physiological level. So that would be a breathing exercise. I do think that diaphragmatic breathing, and the research does support this, is the most calming. So what that means is breathing through your belly and not breathing necessarily through your chest, because they say that it's a deeper breath and a more relaxing breath. And then again, some self-talk incorporated into that as well.
Right. Okay. So yeah, there's tons of research out there that just breathing through your diaphragm, through your nose, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system within about 10 seconds. By doing it, you can't not chill out. Like it totally works. So you have them physiologically with some breathing, calming down that way, and then you might have another sort of mantra or self-talk that's going to get them chilled out too mentally. Yeah.
Yeah, and that mostly consists of positive self-talk and not like, let's just say maybe you didn't get the hit that you wanted or they got you out at the base. So not dwelling on the past, it's just moving forward. So in my dissertation, a lot of the baseball players refer to it as having a short-term memory. Move forward, don't dwell on the past.
Yeah, that's so important. You can do that post-game, watching videos and analyze it then, but during a competition is not the time to do analyzing a failure or even a victory for that matter. You want to keep moving forward in the game, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And now a brief message from our sponsor, Rewire Fitness. If you want to have more high performance in your life and you like performing at a high level, you're going to love this app. You can go to rewirefitness.app. That's rewirefitness.app. And they have this incredible app that's for athletes, actually for all high performers, and is really the only one out there that has a sports psychology or mental performance or a mental fitness and recovery protocol in the app. It's the only one that I know of, and it's incredible. It really works very, very well. You can connect it to all of your wearable stuff and track things and integrates everything. And it's just some amazing stuff for mental fitness. I highly suggest you check it out. If you go to michaelseely.com/podcast, there's a link there for a 20% discount off of their elite program. It is well worth it. Go to michaelseely.com/podcast, click on the Rewire Fitness link, and the code is michaelseely20. Again, michaelseely20.
One thing I want to ask you about is in your practice, in your therapy practice, do you and because I have a therapy practice as well. And I wonder, is there times, say, like where you're working with an athlete or a business person or somebody where you realize that the issue is maybe better addressed in therapy as opposed to coaching? Like it could be some sort of a trauma or some like very major life stressor where they're not really ready for coaching. Is there times when people really shouldn't be doing coaching and should go to therapy for kind of like some repair work?
Yes, definitely. So I have the advantage in that I'm a trained licensed clinical psychologist. So I'm able to recognize when there may be something that's more like a clinical issue, as you say, like a trauma or an anxiety disorder, or maybe even something like an eating disorder. And then I can do coaching as well. So I can treat both simultaneously. But definitely in the sports psychology world, there is some debate about that. But I think the general consensus is that if you just do coaching and you do not have that training in clinical psychology, you absolutely need to recognize when a clinical issue presents itself and refer out. And that doesn't mean that you need to stop working with the athlete on coaching, but that just means that you have to address the clinical issue as well, or else you're missing just like a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I think that's important. I wanted to stress that on the podcast today. Because our backgrounds, we can see when someone is maybe needing some therapy. And I think that's important, maybe for like high school coaches out there or college coaches. If you see an athlete who is really not themselves, like a major shift in behavior or mood or presentation, they may not just need a pep talk, like there might be something going on there. And also just like a word of caution as a coach, you may want to start playing the role of therapist, being a counselor. But if you're in a high school or college, there's tons of resources these days for, wellness centers, and referring an athlete to wellness center or a therapist and getting that sort of adjunct work while you're continuing the coaching is important. So I just wanted to stress that for everyone listening out there. Yeah,
that's a great point.
It can be more complex than just like a performance issue. It could be some deeper psychological stuff going on. That's great. I wanted to ask you also about visualization. I've been doing more and more of that lately, and just finding that's really, really powerful. I'm wondering if that is something that either in your dissertation working with Major League Baseball players, or even in your career at all, like, is that a big thing that you do, visualization, or is that just one of like the tools that you use?
Yeah, so it is one of the tools that I definitely teach people. Understanding that visualization is not a technique that works for everybody. So some people are very visual people, and in that case, it works really well. But if they're not, then it may not be as effective. And what I say is the important parts when using visualization is try to incorporate as many of your 5 senses as you possibly can. So like, not only what does it look like, but like, what does it feel like? What maybe does it sound like, right? Try and incorporate it and really try to put yourself in that moment that you're visualizing as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, that's a great point. And a good reminder to myself as well. Not everyone is a visual person, so that visualization might work like magic with somebody, and somebody else, they might play along, but it may not really resonate with them. So you wanna be careful about that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Let's shift gears in from the sports world more to the business performance world. You work with a lot of entrepreneurs, executives, business folks. It is really similar, sports and business. There's the competition, there's the failure, it's so similar. And yeah, is there a particular kind of business, like a smaller up and coming business, or a startup, or big corporation? Is there any particular group that you like working with best, or do you find that your skill set and the things that you teach are applicable to like all levels in business performance?
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're applicable at all levels. And in my practice, I do see people that are at all levels. Some are startups, some have a big company, right? There's some similarities between that, also some differences. But it's interesting to hear the different phases of growing a business and what their challenges are, and helping them to address and overcome those challenges.
Yeah. And when you're telling me, that thing came to mind was relationships. And I almost wasn't even thinking about this in terms of sports, but let's talk about that for a second. Have you seen that as a factor in sports performance and in business performance? People who have more like social skills or relational skills, or ability to, I'll say, tolerate certain personalities and not be as conflictual. Is that like a good well, first of all, is that a factor? And secondly, can you teach people skills, or is that like an ingrained personality trait?
Yes, so you can teach people social skills, to answer that question. And then, yes, it also is very important in terms of success, both in sports and in business. So in sports, how it applies is, and my participants did talk about this in my dissertation, it's a question of getting along with your teammates, getting along with your coaches, getting along with the management, right? All of that is important. And there have been some examples, I'm not going to name any names right now, but there have been examples of people that have struggled to get along with people. And unfortunately, that does affect their athletic career. I would say maybe even in business, it's more important, because a lot of what I talk to my professionals about is getting along with other people, whether you're the owner and, you have to be a leader, and like, what is the best leadership style? And every single leadership style is not going to be the same for everyone. You have to adapt to each one of your staff or employees and figure out how to lead them in the best way. I've had to work with coworkers getting along, right? Two coworkers can't get along. And so helping them to relate better so that they can be more productive and more efficient in the workplace. So yeah, I could give many more examples, but absolutely, relational skills and social skills are very important, and they can be things that can be learned.
Yeah. Now it's good to hear that it can be learned, because, I've worked with business folks who are, I can't stand this employee, or my business partner this, and it's like, they almost feel like it's an immutable trait. Like, I got to butt heads with this person, but there is a way that you can work on your conflict resolution skills, compromise. There's a lot of things that are, I think, coachable. Yeah. So speaking of coachability, how big of a factor is that in the people you work with? Because I imagine that you may see from time to time, I mean, I hate to say this, but like people who just don't do the homework, and, you try to provide the structure and the engagement, and they just don't do the homework, or they have a really fixed mindset, and they just, you're trying all this stuff and it doesn't work. I'm very a hopeful, positive-minded person. So even then, like, I think there's a solution. But like, have you found times where there's just folks that maybe just aren't coachable? And if so, is there like a technique you use to kind of get them to be like a little more coachable?
Yeah, so in athletes or even a business professional, their willingness to learn is an important factor. If someone thinks that they know everything, even if they're considered an expert in their field, they're blocking themselves in being better at whatever it is that they do. So in sports, an example would be, I have to teach them that what I'm trying to get you to understand and what I'm trying to get you to learn is that these are skills, and skills have to be practiced. It would be the same as like a baseball player, changing their swing in a high pressure situation, or again, a golfer changing their technical skills in their swing on the 18th hole of a big tournament. You wouldn't do that. You need to practice these mental skills just as much as you practice your technical skills, because they're not going to work if you just try and incorporate them in high pressure situations. So I try to kind of get that message across. And I think using those analogies, maybe even in business, right? It would be like a surgeon using a surgical technique that they've never used before when they're doing a high risk surgery. You just wouldn't do that. But the important part is that they're willing to learn, and their ability to learn, and also their willingness and ability to practice these skills, not just in important situations.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you frame that as it's a skill and not this mysterious sort of, mind shift thing. It's like, it's just a skill. Repetition always is important. And you can kind of sell people on that using it that way, right?
Yeah, that usually seems to resonate with people when you kind of relate it, because they're always like, especially athletes or, even business professionals as well. They're so focused on like the technical part of things or the practical part of things. And it's like, yeah, that's great too. But then if you can relate that to the mental side of things, they seem to make that connection a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Tell us about your online courses. I was looking on your website. They look really awesome.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about like some examples of maybe lessons and how people can start and enroll in your programs.
Yeah, so my program, actually the content for the program, it's an online program. It's asynchronous, meaning that you do it at your own pace. It probably, if you sat down all at once to do it, it'd be about 2.5 hours. And it's available online through my website, also through my Instagram and Facebook. But the content for it is based off of the results that I got from my dissertation research from the Major League Baseball players that I've been talking about. But then it's how do you translate that into a business setting? So there's different modules and there's different lessons. We talk about things like focus and concentration, how to increase motivation, how to set goals, how to improve your work ethic, how to be an effective leader, how to manage stress that goes along with the job. So it's really all the same stuff that the Major League Baseball players face, just in a different setting. And so it's different videos, and then there's worksheets that go along with each video. And then I also include some bonus exercises, one of them being visualization, which is what we've already talked about. And then another one teaches you how to do mindfulness exercises.
Nice. So it's based on research and your years of experience working in therapy that combined together. What worked, what didn't work. You got it honed into this basically this system so that people graduate from it. They're going to have this, amplified skill set. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, it was actually one of my clients that I worked with that had a lot of success in working with me, who made the suggestion that I should do this online course, because he said, you need to make this available to more people, because this was so helpful to me. And at the end of the course, if you do complete the course, there also is opportunities for you to work with me one-on-one if you'd like to do more.
That's awesome. Because there's so many courses out there where you get done with it and you're like, okay, I'm good, right? So if you have a coach, you can actually like, okay, now I have this skill set, I'm even more hungry. And then you can work with that client because you taught them all this stuff. So it's like a way to accelerate their learning instead of just doing one-on-one with you where you're teaching them all the modules. They got it all packed in. They come to see you. They're probably more ready to make progress with you once they meet with you one-on-one, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
the working one-on-one is to maybe just personalize it a little bit more.
Yeah.
These lessons are definitely things that are common across the board for most people. And I try to include the most important ones that I found both in my research and in my clinical practice. But if
Yeah.
they're wanting more personalized work, that's what the one-on-ones are for.
I love it. That's awesome. And tell us the name of the program and the website so that people can access it.
Yeah, so the program is called Believe It, Achieve It. You can go to my main website, that's drkimwagner.com. And there is a tab on the website where you click on that and it takes you directly to the page. There's an introduction video. You can learn more specifically what the course is about. It's also available on my Instagram and Facebook page. So it's just Dr. Kimberly Wagner for both of those. There's also, right now I have a free guide that's available, and it's called the 5 Secrets of High Achievers. And so that's a little bit of an introduction to my work that gives you a little bit of taste of what you can expect from the rest of the course.
Awesome. Can you share one secret of the 5 secrets of high achievers? I'm curious. As a teaser? Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably say self-confidence is the most important secret, if you want to say, of high achievers. If that, in my experience, has to be there. And so in the course, I go in more detail about that. But that is definitely probably the biggest secret, is having self-confidence.
Okay. And I want to press you just a little bit more, like what's one thing maybe people listening to this podcast can do, say if they're an athlete or a business person performing at a high level, to start to improve their confidence more, like one thing that they could do?
So probably the biggest thing that they can do is paying more attention to their self-talk. It's interesting because sometimes I'll ask people, well, what were you thinking? And they say, well, I wasn't thinking anything. And I say to them, that's impossible. You probably were thinking something. You just weren't aware of it. So let's increase awareness to what your self-talk is. And what I find is that when people start paying attention to their self-talk, more often than not, it's negative. And so what I teach them is not only to make the negative self-talk positive, but it's also oftentimes irrational. So I change that from irrational to rational. So it's negative and irrational to positive and rational thoughts. And I do really encourage people to write them down, especially in the beginning when you're trying to get used to this process and changing your thoughts. Because if you're just thinking about it in your head, sometimes it doesn't resonate as much. So I say, hey, write it down, cross out the old thought, write down the new thought, and then just keep repeating that new set of thoughts. And eventually you'll internalize that. And then that will become your internal dialogue automatically without even having to think about it.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It is the self-talk. And for most of us, it is running in the background and we're not even aware of it. So that if you can write it down on paper, maybe get a journal, write down. And I think by default, Dr. Wagner, like it is negative, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with you as a human being if it's negative, because the brain is there, like the primal brain there, and this negative self-talk is there to really kind of protect us. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of it sometimes is about survival instincts that we don't need anymore and that don't apply to the world today. But, back when humans were first around, they needed that. But that's the thing, is figuring out, okay, well, what do I need now? And what can I get rid of and is not serving me well anymore?
Right. So by putting it on paper, it's no longer a mystery. Like, oh, here's the negative ones, and you write them all down. And you can notice when they're on paper if they're irrational. Oftentimes they are. And then what you're saying is write like a counter to that, a positive self-talk that's going to actually help you. And if you repeat this regularly, you become more like the executive of your mind, of your sort of primordial mind, and your confidence. I think through repetition, at least the work I've done with people similarly, is you start to like positively brainwash yourself, really. And
what I say to people is control your thoughts. Don't let your thoughts control you. So kind of beat them to the punch, because if you can put the thoughts in your mind first, then the negative thoughts are a lot less likely to creep in. So you want to have control over what thoughts are going through your mind, not letting the thoughts control you.
That's awesome. I think that's a great note to end on. Just an empowering statement like that is that you can be the master of your mind through repetition and skills. Working with a coach like you, Dr. Wagner, I think is a great place for people to start. And best of luck to you and your work. I'm excited about the conversation today. I've got a lot of notes here, and so it was a pleasure talking with you. And thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.